Marcus Chen had been silent for 3 years, 2 months, and 17 days. Not by choice, but because the neural dampener lodged in his brainstem made sure of it. The Cathurian Empire had many ways to break their prisoners, but they found silence to be the most effective for humans. Take away their words, their ability to communicate, and watch them crumble from the inside out. They were wrong about Marcus. The prisoner transport ship Inexorable cut through the void between star systems, its hull a dark metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Inside its belly, 300 beings from across the galaxy sat in enforced silence, their various forms of communication severed by Cathurian technology. Some had been warriors, others diplomats, scientists, or simply civilians caught in the wrong place when the Empire's expansion reached their worlds. Marcus sat in cell block 7, row 12, seat 43. The numbers had become his mantra, the only constant in a world stripped of language. Around him, other prisoners rocked back and forth, some crying tears that made no sound, others staring into nothing with the hollow look of those who had forgotten what hope felt like. But Marcus watched. He had always been good at watching, even before the war, even before they took his voice. His mother used to say he could read people like books written in large print. Now, stripped of speech, that skill had sharpened to a razor's edge. The Cathurian guards moved through the aisles with the fluid grace of their species, their elongated limbs ending in too many joints, their faces hidden behind masks that translated their thoughts directly into action. They never spoke aloud. Why would they, when their minds could share information instantly across vast distances? To them, verbal communication was primitive, inefficient, the mark of lesser species. Marcus had learned their patrol patterns months ago. Guard shift changes every 6 standard hours. Cell inspection every 12. Feeding time varied deliberately to prevent routine, but never exceeded 14 hours between meals. The Cathurians were methodical, which meant they were predictable. In the seat beside him, a Vrex female named Keela twitched her antennae in what Marcus had learned was distress. The Vrex communicated through chemical signals and antenna movements, a language the dampeners couldn't fully suppress, though they muted it significantly. Over the past year, Marcus had begun to understand the basics of her expressions. Keela's antennae were pointing toward the front of the ship, trembling in a pattern Marcus had never seen before. Her large, compound eyes reflected fragments of the corridor lights, creating a kaleidoscope of alarm. Something was different about today's routine. Marcus followed her gaze and felt his heart rate increase. 3 Cathurian guards approached their section, but they moved with purpose rather than the lazy confidence of routine patrol. Behind them walked a figure that made every prisoner in the vicinity recoil. Interrogator Prime Velter was a creature of legend among the imprisoned. Where most Cathurians stood 8 feet tall with graceful, almost delicate builds, Velter was a monstrosity of genetic modification and cybernetic enhancement. Multiple arms sprouted from his torso, each ending in specialized tools for extracting information. His mask was larger, more elaborate, embedded with neural interfaces that could dive directly into a subject's mind and root around like a surgeon with bloody hands. The prisoners called him the Mind Ripper, though never where the guards could see their gestures or expressions. Velter had broken generals, demolished the sanity of diplomats, and turned the most hardened resistance fighters into babbling shells. He was efficiency personified, the Empire's answer to stubborn silence. And he was walking directly toward Marcus. The young man forced himself to remain calm, drawing on years of military training that predated his capture. Panic was information, and information was power he couldn't afford to give away. He kept his breathing steady, his expression neutral, and his hands relaxed on his knees. Velter stopped in front of Marcus's row and studied him with sensors that could detect everything from heart rate to the chemical composition of his sweat. Those terrible multiple arms moved in patterns that might have been communication with the accompanying guards, or might have been preparation for what was to come. Prisoner designation Human 7743 Marcus. Velter's voice came through a translator that made every word sound like breaking glass. You are summoned for enhanced interrogation. The guards moved forward with practiced efficiency, unlocking Marcus's restraints and hauling him to his feet. As they did, he caught sight of Keela's antennae one more time. They were moving in a complex pattern he'd never seen before, almost frantic in their intensity. For just a moment, he thought he understood what she was trying to tell him. Be ready. Marcus didn't have time to puzzle over the meaning before they dragged him away from the cell block and deeper into the ship's interior. The corridors here were different, cleaner, more advanced, humming with the kind of technology that could peel apart a mind like an onion and examine each layer separately. They brought him to a chamber that existed solely for breaking the unbreakable. The walls were lined with neural interface ports, pain amplifiers, and memory extraction devices that could pull thoughts from a brain and display them like movies on the curved ceiling above. In the center of the room sat a chair that looked more like a mechanical spider, all extending arms and probing appendages designed to hold a subject perfectly still while Velter worked. "You have been remarkably resistant to standard procedures," Velter said as the guards strapped Marcus into the chair. 3 years of captivity, and still your psychological profile indicates unbroken will. This is unusual for your species. The mechanical arms of the chair moved to position themselves at various points around Marcus's head and body. Each one ended in a different tool, some for physical stimulation, others for neural interface, still others for purposes Marcus didn't want to consider. The Chthonian Empire has conquered 47 star systems and subdued countless species, Velter continued, his multiple hands dancing over control surfaces that materialized from thin air. "In every case, we have found communication to be the key to domination. Take away a species' ability to organize, to share information, to maintain cultural bonds, and resistance crumbles within a generation." Marcus felt the first tentative probes of the neural interfaces as they made contact with his skull. The sensation was like ice water being poured directly onto his brain, followed by a burning that seemed to originate from inside his thoughts themselves. "Humans have proven particularly susceptible to communication suppression," Velter observed, watching readouts that displayed Marcus's vital signs and neural activity. "Your psychological dependency on verbal interaction borders on addiction. Most of your kind break within months of receiving dampener implants." The pain intensified and Marcus felt his vision blur. But he held onto consciousness through sheer force of will, using techniques he'd learned during resistance training that felt like a lifetime ago. Focus on something constant, his serial number, his mother's face, the sound of rain on the roof of his childhood home. "Yet you persist," Velter said, and there was something like admiration in the translated voice. 3 years of silence and your mind remains structurally intact. Tell me, human 7743 Marcus, what sustains you when your most fundamental need has been severed? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus knew Velter didn't expect an answer, couldn't receive one, given the dampener. But the interrogator prime was probing for psychological weaknesses, emotional pressure points that could be exploited. Marcus thought about the question seriously. What did sustain him? It wasn't hope of rescue that had died in the first year. It wasn't anger, though he'd nursed that flame for longer than was healthy. It wasn't even the desire for revenge, though the thought of seeing the Chthonian Empire burn sometimes kept him warm at night. No, what sustained him was simpler and more complex than any of that. It was the recognition that silence wasn't the absence of communication. It was just another form of it. Every day he'd spent watching, learning, understanding the patterns of his captors and fellow prisoners had been a conversation. Keela's antenna movements, the guards' behavioral routines, the ship's operational rhythms, all of it was language, just not the kind the Chthonians understood. They had silenced his voice, but not his mind. They had taken his words, but not his ability to see, to comprehend, to plan. "Interesting," Velter murmured, studying the readouts. "Your neural patterns suggest anticipation. How curious. What could you possibly be anticipating in your current circumstances?" As if in answer to his question, the ship's lighting suddenly shifted from its normal steady glow to the pulsing red of emergency status. A vibration ran through the deck plating that had nothing to do with the ship's engines. The inexorable was under attack. Velter's multiple arms moved in rapid patterns, interfacing with ship communications that Marcus couldn't hear. But he could read the interrogator prime's body language, could see the tension that suddenly gripped those augmented limbs. The ship shuddered again, more violently this time, and several of the neural interface devices lost contact with Marcus's skull. Through the chamber's single viewport, he could see flashes of weapons fire in the darkness of space, not the organized patterns of Chthonian fleet movements, but the chaotic dance of a desperate battle. Velter spoke rapidly in his own language, his translator apparently disabled in the emergency. Marcus watched the creature's movements, noting the way his attention divided between the interrogation equipment and the tactical displays that had appeared around the room. Then the ship's gravity failed. Marcus felt his stomach drop as the artificial gravity generators went offline, sending everything in the interrogation chamber into free fall. The restraints on the chair kept him from floating away, but Velter and his equipment were less fortunate. The interrogator prime's multiple arms flailed as he tried to grab onto something solid while his specialized torture devices spun away into the air around them. Emergency lighting bathed everything in hellish red as backup systems came online. Through the chaos, Marcus could actually hear, sounds that shouldn't have been possible. Explosions, weapon fire, and most impossibly of all, voices. Human voices. The dampener in his brainstem should have made it impossible to process vocal communication, but somehow he could understand every word being shouted through the ship's corridors. Rescue teams, coordinated assaults, tactical communications in the crisp, efficient patterns of military operations he remembered from before his capture. Sector 7 clear, moving to prisoner containment. Charges set on the main computer core. We've got multiple Cathurian response teams converging on our position. Marcus tried to call out, tried to add his voice to the beautiful chaos of human communication, but the dampener still held. His throat moved, but no sound emerged, his vocal cords as useless as they'd been for the past 3 years. Velter had managed to stabilize himself against a wall and was frantically working to restore ship systems. His multiple arms moved in patterns Marcus now recognized as desperate communication with other parts of the ship, but something was wrong. The usual fluidity of Cathurian mental coordination seemed broken, fragmented. The rescue teams were using some kind of jamming technology that disrupted the aliens' telepathic communication networks. A new sound echoed through the corridors, heavy footsteps moving with military precision. Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs as the footsteps grew louder, closer. The interrogation chamber's door, which had sealed automatically during the emergency, suddenly glowed white-hot around its edges. Thermal lance, human technology, they were cutting their way in. Velter abandoned his attempts at ship control and moved toward Marcus with obvious intent. If the interrogator prime was about to lose his prize, he would extract what information he could before. The door exploded inward in a shower of molten metal and superheated gas. Through the smoke and flame came figures in powered armor that Marcus recognized with a surge of joy, so intense it was almost painful. Terran colonial marines, their armor scarred and battle-worn, but bearing the proud insignia of humanity's resistance forces. Contact, 1 Cathurian interrogator, 1 human prisoner. The squad leader's voice was crisp and professional even as his squad's weapons tracked Velter across the room. Velter's multiple arms moved in what Marcus had learned to recognize as surrender gestures, but the Marines weren't interested in prisoners. A burst of plasma fire reduced the interrogator prime to his component atoms, leaving only the smell of ozone and the fatting echo of his final screams. "Sir, we've got a live one here," one of the Marines said, approaching Marcus's chair. "Looks like they had him in for enhanced interrogation." The squad leader moved closer, and Marcus could see his face through the armor's transparent faceplate. The man was young, probably no older than Marcus had been when he was captured, but his eyes held the weight of someone who'd seen too much war. "Can you hear me, soldier?" the Marine asked, beginning to work on Marcus's restraints. "We're getting you out of here, you're safe now." Marcus tried to respond, to tell them about the dampener, about the 300 other prisoners in the cell blocks, about everything he'd learned during his captivity. But no words came. The Marine noticed his attempts at speech and frowned, running a medical scanner over Marcus's head. "Neural dampener embedded in the brainstem," he announced to his squad. "We'll need a full surgical team to remove it safely." "No time for that now," another Marine called from the doorway. "Cathurian reinforcements are mobilizing. We need to extract all prisoners and get clear before they bring up their heavy units." The squad leader looked frustrated, clearly wanting to do more for Marcus but constrained by the tactical situation. "Can you walk?" he asked. Marcus nodded, testing his legs as the restraints came free. 3 years of limited movement had weakened him, but adrenaline and hope were powerful motivators. He stood on shaking legs, holding onto the chair for support. Good, stay close to us and we'll get you out of here. They moved through corridors that had become a war zone. Cathurian guards lay dead at regular intervals, their elegant forms twisted and broken by human weapons. Emergency lights painted everything in shades of red and shadow, and the air was thick with smoke and the acrid smell of discharged energy weapons. As they passed through the ship's main prisoner containment area, Marcus saw hundreds of beings from dozens of different species being evacuated by more marine squads. The rescue operation was massive, coordinated, and most importantly, successful. Someone had learned the location of the inexorable and mounted a full-scale assault to free its prisoners. But how? The Cathurian Empire's prison ships followed routes known only to the highest levels of their command structure. For humans to have found this vessel, they would have needed intelligence that should have been impossible to obtain. Marcus was still puzzling over this when they reached the ship's main docking bay. The sight that greeted him there nearly brought him to his knees with relief and wonder. 3 human ships hung in the darkness outside the bay's atmospheric barrier, their hulls scarred from recent combat but intact. More importantly, they were flying the colors of the Terran Resistance Fleet, organized human forces that had supposedly been scattered and broken years ago. Humanity was fighting back. Despite everything the Cathurian Empire had done, despite the conquered worlds and silenced voices, humans had found a way to coordinate, to resist, to strike back at their oppressors. The evacuation proceeded with military efficiency. Prisoners were sorted by species and medical needs, with priority given to those requiring immediate life support. Marcus found himself assigned to the medical frigate Hippocrates, along with dozens of other beings who needed specialized care. As the shuttle carried them away from the inexorable, Marcus pressed his face to a viewport and watched the prison ship grow smaller in the distance. Within minutes, it was just another point of light in the stellar background, but he would remember every detail of its interior for the rest of his life. The journey to the medical ship was brief, and soon Marcus found himself in a clean, well-lit medical bay surrounded by human doctors and nurses who treated him with a gentle professionalism that brought tears to his eyes. After 3 years of Cathurian efficiency and cold calculation, simple human kindness felt like a miracle. "We're going to remove the neural dampener," Dr. Sarah Chen explained as she prepared him for surgery. "It's a delicate procedure, but we've had experience with Cathurian neural devices. There's a good chance we can restore your ability to speak." Marcus nodded, not trusting himself to attempt words even if they were possible. The hope was too precious to risk damaging with premature expectations. The surgery took 4 hours. Marcus drifted in and out of consciousness under anesthesia, sometimes dreaming of voices he'd thought he'd never hear again, his mother calling him for dinner, his squad leader giving orders during their last mission, the laughter of friends who were probably long dead. When he finally woke up, the first thing he noticed was the absence of pressure in his skull. For 3 years, the dampener had been a constant presence, like a headache that never quite went away. Now that pressure was gone, leaving behind a lightness that felt almost dizzy. Dr. Chen was checking his vital signs, her expression cautiously optimistic. "How do you feel?" she asked. Marcus opened his mouth to respond and felt his throat move in ways it hadn't for 3 years. The sensation was strange, almost foreign, as if he were relearning how to use parts of his body that had been forgotten. The word came out as barely a whisper, rough and uncertain, but it was a word, his voice. Dr. Chen smiled. "Take it slow. Your vocal cords will need time to remember how to work properly." "Thank you," Marcus managed, his voice growing slightly stronger with each syllable. How did you find us?" The doctor's expression grew more serious. "That's a question for the intelligence officers. They'll want to debrief you once you've recovered." Marcus nodded, understanding the need for operational security even as curiosity burned in his chest. 3 years of questions were finally going to get answers. Over the next few days, as his voice gradually returned to something approaching normal, Marcus learned about the state of the war from fellow prisoners and medical staff. The Cathurian Empire had indeed conquered most of human space, but pockets of resistance had survived in hidden bases and mobile fleets. The rescue operation that freed the inexorable had been one of the largest coordinated strikes in years. But the details of how they'd located the prison ship remained classified, even as Marcus underwent extensive debriefing sessions with intelligence officers who seemed very interested in his observations about Cathurian guard routines and ship operations. It wasn't until a week later that he got his answer, and it came from the most unexpected source imaginable. Marcus was in the ship's recreation area, practicing conversation with other rescued prisoners and slowly readjusting to the miracle of verbal communication, when a familiar figure approached his table. Keela, the Vrex female who had sat beside him for over a year, moved across the room with the characteristic chittering gait of her species. Her antennae were held high in what Marcus now knew was an expression of pleased anticipation. "Human Marcus," she said through a translation device that converted her chemical communications into audible speech. "I am gratified to observe your voice restoration." "Keela," Marcus stood to greet her, amazed at how good it felt to speak her name aloud. "I'm so happy you made it out safely. I never got to properly thank you for everything during our imprisonment." The Vrex's compound eyes reflected the room's lighting in patterns that suggested amusement. Gratitude is unnecessary. Communication sharing between prisoners was necessity for survival. "Communication sharing?" Marcus frowned. "But the dampeners prevented us from talking." Keela's antennae moved in complex patterns that the translator seemed to struggle with. When it finally spoke, there was something like laughter in the electronic voice. "Dampeners prevent vocal communication and telepathic communication. Cannot prevent observation communication and pattern recognition communication. You spoke many words during imprisonment, human Marcus, without voice, but with action, with attention, with understanding." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "What do you mean?" "Vrex intelligence networks have monitored Cathurian prison operations for many cycles," Keela explained. "Prisoners who demonstrate cross-species communication ability despite suppression technology are valuable intelligence assets. Your patterns of observation and behavioral adaptation were noted by Vrex scouts." The translation device paused for a moment, and when it resumed, Keela's words carried weight that made Marcus's breath catch. "Information regarding inexorable location and prisoner manifest was provided to Terran resistance networks through Vrex intelligence channels. Rescue operation was initiated based on confirmed presence of high-value assets." Marcus stared at her, the implications hitting him like a physical blow. "You're saying the rescue happened because you told your people I was worth saving?" "Incorrect," Keela replied, her antennae moving in what he now recognized as gentle correction. "Rescue happened because you demonstrated that silence is not absence of communication. Your ability to speak without voice proved humans possess communication capabilities that transcend Cathurian suppression technology." She paused, and when the translator next spoke, it was with something approaching reverence. "Among Vrex intelligence networks, you are known by designation title that roughly translates as the silent speaker or voice that requires no sound. But more recently, reports refer to you by different designation title." Marcus felt his heart hammering as he waited for her to continue. "Human Marcus 7743 is designated by Vrex networks as Death Who Watches, or, in more colloquial translation." Keela's antennae stilled for a moment, and when they resumed their movement, the translator's voice was hushed with something that might have been awe. "The Reaper." Marcus stared at Keela in stunned silence, the weight of her revelation settling over him like a heavy blanket. The Reaper. Somehow, during 3 years of enforced silence and captivity, he had become a legend among alien intelligence networks. "I don't understand," he finally managed. "What did I do that was so significant?" Keela's antennae moved in patterns that suggested both amusement and something deeper. Respect, perhaps, or recognition of something Marcus himself didn't yet grasp. "Human Marcus does not comprehend scope of achievement," she explained through the translator. "Cathurian Empire has perfected communication suppression across 47 conquered systems. No species has demonstrated sustained resistance to isolation protocols until observation of human Marcus behaviors." The recreation area around them had grown quiet, Marcus realized. Other prisoners and medical staff were listening to their conversation with obvious interest. He felt uncomfortable being the center of attention, especially for reasons he didn't fully understand. "Your ability to maintain psychological coherence under suppression conditions became study subject for Vrex intelligence analysis," Keela continued. Initial reports suggested possible genetic anomaly or cybernetic enhancement. Further observation revealed truth more significant. She paused, her compound eyes reflecting the room's lights in what Marcus had learned indicated deep thought. Human Marcus developed new form of communication, not replacement for voice communication, but expansion of communication possibilities beyond Cathurian understanding. This development was unprecedented. Before Marcus could respond, a new voice interrupted their conversation. Prisoner designation Marcus Chen, report for command briefing immediately. The speaker was a Terran colonial marine sergeant, his dress uniform crisp and bearing the insignia of Intelligence Division. Marcus recognized the type, career military, efficient, and not particularly interested in small talk. Sir, Marcus stood, unconsciously falling into military bearing despite his civilian clothes. Reporting as ordered. The sergeant's expression softened slightly. At ease, Chen. You're not under military authority anymore, but Admiral Harrison wants to speak with you personally. Admiral Harrison. Marcus knew the name from before his capture, one of the few high-ranking officers to successfully escape the Cathurian offensive and disappear into the resistance networks. If Harrison wanted to speak with him personally, whatever was happening was significant. Marcus nodded to Keela. We'll continue this conversation later. Affirmative, Human Marcus. There is much more to discuss regarding your reputation among non-human intelligence communities. The walk to the command section gave Marcus time to think about Keela's words. He'd spent 3 years believing himself forgotten, irrelevant, just another prisoner among thousands. To learn that his actions had somehow become significant enough to influence rescue operations was deeply unsettling. What had he done that was so important? He'd watched, listened without speaking, learned patterns and routines. Basic survival behavior for any prisoner. The idea that such simple actions could be considered revolutionary seemed impossible. The command briefing room was smaller than Marcus had expected, dominated by a holographic display showing tactical information he couldn't immediately parse. Around the central table sat 3 figures who rose as he entered. Admiral Harrison was exactly what Marcus had expected from his reputation, tall, silver-haired, with the kind of calm authority that came from decades of military leadership. The woman beside him was younger, wearing the uniform of Terran intelligence with the rank of colonel. The third figure was alien, a Cathari whose crystalline body structure caught the room's lighting in beautiful, complex patterns. Mr. Chen, Admiral Harrison stepped forward with his hand extended. Thank you for agreeing to this meeting. I'm Admiral Harrison, this is Colonel Santos from Intelligence, and our colleague here is Kristek, representing the Cathari Republic. Marcus shook the Admiral's hand, nodding the firm grip and steady eye contact. Sir, though I should mention, I'm not sure what I can tell you that wasn't already covered in my debriefings. Actually, Colonel Santos spoke for the first time, her voice carrying a slight accent Marcus couldn't place. This meeting is more about what we can tell you. Your situation has implications that go far beyond a simple prisoner rescue. Admiral Harrison gestured toward the chairs around the table. Please sit. What we're about to discuss is classified at the highest levels, but given your unique position, you have both the clearance and the need to know. Marcus settled into a chair, his mind racing. My unique position. The alien, Kristek, spoke in a voice that sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Human Marcus Chen, your designation among interstellar intelligence networks has evolved significantly during your captivity period. You are no longer considered simply a prisoner of war. I don't understand. Colonel Santos leaned forward, her expression intense. Marcus, during your 3 years in Cathurian custody, you became the subject of observation by no fewer than 12 different alien intelligence services. Your behavior patterns, your methods of non-vocal communication, your psychological resilience, all of it was monitored, analyzed, and ultimately deemed significant enough to influence major strategic decisions. She activated the holographic display, which showed a complex web of information flows and strategic assessments. Marcus could see his own designation appear multiple times throughout the data. The Vrex weren't the only ones watching you, she continued. The Cathari, the Zelani Collective, the Thren Empire, even the normally isolationist Void Dancers, all of them had assets monitoring your situation. Admiral Harrison took over the explanation. What they observed was something unprecedented in the annals of Cathurian conquest. Every species they've subjugated has followed the same pattern: initial resistance, gradual breakdown of communication networks, psychological collapse, and finally acceptance of occupation. Humans have been following that pattern too in most cases, Colonel Santos added. But you represented something different, a form of resistance that the Cathurians couldn't suppress because they didn't understand it existed. Marcus felt overwhelmed. I still don't see how watching guard patrols and learning alien body language makes me strategically significant. Christek's crystalline form shifted colors, indicating what Marcus assumed was amusement or irony. Human Marcus Gen demonstrates the limitation of single-species perspective. Your actions were not significant in isolation. They were significant as proof of concept. Proof of what concept? That consciousness can transcend the communication methods it was designed to use, Admiral Harrison said quietly. That intelligence can adapt to limitations and find new pathways for connection and coordination. The implications began to dawn on Marcus. You're saying other humans can learn to do what I did. We're saying they already are, Colonel Santos replied, manipulating the holographic display to show new data. Once the various intelligence networks confirmed that human consciousness could adapt to communication suppression, they began sharing their observations with resistance cells throughout occupied space. The display now showed dozens of resistance operations across multiple star systems, all marked with tactical assessments that included references to enhanced human communication protocols and Chen pattern behavioral adaptation. Your 3 years of silence have become a training template, Admiral Harrison explained. Resistance fighters are learning to communicate through observation, pattern recognition, and environmental awareness. The Cathurians' primary weapon, communication suppression, is losing its effectiveness. Marcus stared at the display, watching tactical information flow between resistance cells that should have been cut off from each other, coordinating operations that should have been impossible under Cathurian occupation. His throat felt tight with emotion he couldn't name. There's more, Colonel Santos said softly. The rescue operation that freed you wasn't just about saving prisoners. It was about retrieving you specifically because the alien intelligence networks believe you've developed beyond the initial adaptation. What do you mean? Christek's form shifted to deeper hues. 3 years of silent observation in Cathurian captivity has granted human Marcus Gen unprecedented insight into enemy operational patterns. Combined with enhanced communication abilities, this knowledge represents strategic advantage of significant magnitude. Admiral Harrison nodded. Marcus, you've seen the inner workings of Cathurian prison operations, interrogation techniques, guard protocols, and ship systems in a way no intelligence officer could have managed. You've observed their psychological assumptions, their tactical blind spots, their operational procedures. More importantly, Colonel Santos added, you've proven that human consciousness can not only survive but adapt and grow stronger under the exact conditions the Cathurians use to break other species. That knowledge is changing how we approach the entire war. Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a physical presence. What exactly are you asking me to do? Help us teach others, Admiral Harrison said simply. The communication protocols you developed, the observation techniques you used, the psychological resilience you maintained, we need to understand them well enough to train other humans. But more than that, Colonel Santos continued, we need your strategic insights about Cathurian operations. You've spent 3 years watching them work, learning their patterns, understanding their assumptions about how consciousness operates. Christek's chimes grew more complex. Human Marcus Gen possesses knowledge that could accelerate liberation of occupied territories by decades. The question is whether human consciousness is prepared to accept responsibility for such knowledge. Marcus looked around the table at the 3 faces watching him expectantly. A week ago, he'd been a forgotten prisoner, grateful just to have his voice back. Now they were telling him he'd somehow become a key strategic asset in humanity's fight for survival. I need to understand something, he said finally. You keep talking about communication protocols and consciousness adaptation like I deliberately developed some kind of system, but I was just trying to survive. I watched the guards because I was bored. I learned to read alien expressions because it was the only entertainment I had. There was no grand plan. That's exactly what makes it significant, Admiral Harrison replied. You didn't develop these abilities through formal training or conscious effort. They emerged naturally as your mind adapted to extreme constraints. That suggests they're inherent capabilities of human consciousness that can be awakened in others. Colonel Santos nodded. Every human who's undergone similar training has reported that the techniques feel natural, almost instinctive, once they understand what they're trying to do. You didn't invent something new, you discovered something that was already there. The Cathurians believe communication requires direct information transfer, Christek added. Vocal speech, telepathic connection, chemical signals, electromagnetic transmission. They cannot comprehend communication through pure observation and environmental awareness because their consciousness does not operate that way. Marcus thought about his years of watching, of learning to read meaning in the smallest details of behavior and routine. It had felt natural, like flexing muscles he'd never known he possessed. What would this training involve? He asked. Initially, we'd want you to work with our psychologists and communication specialists to codify what you learned, Colonel Santos explained. Document the techniques, identify the key principles, develop training protocols that can be taught to others. Then we'd need you to work directly with resistance cells, teaching them to implement these methods in active operations, Admiral Harrison added. Your insights into Cathurian psychology and behavior patterns could give our people crucial advantages in occupied territories. Finally, Christek's tones grew more serious. There is the matter of your reputation among alien intelligence networks. The designation, Reaper, carries significant weight in interstellar strategic planning. Your involvement in operations provides credibility and coordination opportunities that would otherwise be unavailable. Marcus felt a chill at the mention of his apparently widespread reputation. About that designation, why Reaper? What did I do to earn such a dramatic title? The three exchanged glances that suggested this was a topic they'd hoped to avoid. Colonel Santos finally answered. During your captivity, 17 Cathurian prison facilities experienced significant operational failures that resulted in massive prisoner escapes. In every case, the security breakdowns could be traced to subtle changes in prisoner behavior patterns that the guards couldn't identify or counter. The prisoners were using modified versions of your observation and communication techniques, Admiral Harrison continued. Techniques that spread through the prison populations like a virus, passed from one prisoner to another through the same methods you'd developed. Christek's crystalline form shifted to darker hues. Cathurian intelligence reports from affected facilities all mention observations of silent human prisoner who appeared to be coordinating resistance activities without detectable communication. Description matched human Marcus-gen identity. Marcus felt his blood run cold. But I never coordinated any escapes. I never even attempted to escape myself. You didn't need to, Colonel Santos said quietly. Your mere presence, your demonstration that humans could maintain resistance under total communication suppression, was enough to inspire others. Every prisoner who observed your techniques and adapted them carried those methods to other facilities. The name Reaper doesn't refer to causing death, Admiral Harrison explained. It refers to harvesting, gathering up what appeared to be dead and lost, and revealing that it was actually alive and capable of growth. You became a symbol, Colonel Santos added. Proof that human consciousness couldn't be broken by Cathurian methods. That symbol spread throughout the prison systems and eventually into the wider intelligence networks. Marcus sat in stunned silence, processing the revelation that his simple survival strategies had somehow triggered a widespread resistance movement. The responsibility felt overwhelming, but beneath the shock was a growing sense of purpose. If I agree to this, he said slowly, what kind of timeline are we talking about? The war situation is accelerating, Admiral Harrison replied. Cathurian forces are preparing for what they call the final coordination, a massive operation designed to eliminate all remaining resistance networks simultaneously. Our intelligence suggests they have approximately 6 months to complete preparations. 6 months to teach an entire resistance movement new communication protocols, Marcus asked. 6 months to give humanity the tools it needs to survive what's coming, Colonel Santos corrected. The communication techniques are just the beginning. Your insights into Cathurian operations could help us identify weaknesses we've never seen, exploit blind spots we never knew existed. Christek's chimes grew urgent. Time factor is critical. Cathurian intelligence has noted the spread of Chen pattern resistance techniques and is developing countermeasures. Window of strategic advantage is narrowing. Marcus looked around the table again, seeing the weight of expectation in their faces. A week ago, his greatest ambition had been to hear his own voice again. Now they were asking him to help save humanity. But as he thought about it, he realized the choice had been made years ago, in a cell on a prison ship when he decided to keep watching, keep learning, keep resisting in the only way available to him. Everything since then had been inevitable consequence. "When do we start?" he asked. Admiral Harrison smiled for the first time during the meeting. "Immediately. We have resistance cells waiting for instruction, training facilities prepared, and a very short window to change the course of this war." "One more question," Marcus said as they prepared to leave. "This reputation, this Reaper designation, how widespread is it really?" Colonel Santos exchanged glances with the others. "Marcus, there are Cathurian commanders who wake up every night terrified of a human prisoner they've never met. There are alien intelligence services restructuring their strategic assessments based on your demonstrated capabilities. You're not just known in resistance circles, you're known throughout the galaxy. The Cathurian Empire has placed a bounty on your capture equivalent to the gross domestic product of a small planet," Christek added casually. "You are considered a strategic threat of the highest magnitude." Marcus felt a laugh bubble up in his chest, the first genuine laughter he'd experienced in 3 years. "A strategic threat, me?" "Yes," Admiral Harrison said seriously. "You, the man who proved that human consciousness can't be caged, even when the cage is built inside the mind itself." As they left the briefing room, Marcus caught his reflection in a polished metal surface. He looked older than his years, marked by captivity and loss. But there was something else there now, purpose, direction, and the knowledge that his 3 years of silence had not been wasted. The galaxy knew his name. The enemy feared his reputation. And somewhere in occupied space, human prisoners were learning to speak without words, to resist without weapons, to fight back using tools that no cage could contain. The Reaper was going home, and he had work to do. 5 months after his rescue, Marcus Chen stood in the observation deck of the Resistance flagship Defiant Dawn, watching the final preparations for Operation Silent Thunder. Through the reinforced viewport, he could see dozens of ships from multiple species preparing for what would either be humanity's greatest victory or its final defeat. The transformation had been remarkable. In 5 months, Marcus had traveled to 17 different resistance cells across 12 star systems, teaching his techniques to thousands of fighters. What had begun as simple survival methods had evolved into a comprehensive communication and intelligence system that the Cathurians still couldn't counter. "The Thren Battle Group reports ready," announced Commander Lisa Rodriguez, the Defiant Dawn's tactical officer. "All units are standing by for your signal." Marcus nodded, still uncomfortable with the deference everyone showed him. The Reaper's reputation had grown beyond all reason during the past months. Some resistance fighters treated him like a living legend, others like a supernatural force. He was neither, just a man who'd learned to watch and listen in new ways. But the results spoke for themselves. Every resistance cell he'd trained had reported dramatic improvements in operational effectiveness. Prison breaks had increased in frequency and success rate. Intelligence gathering had become far more sophisticated. Most importantly, human morale throughout occupied space had soared as word spread that humanity had found new ways to fight back. "Sir," Commander Rodriguez continued, "we're receiving confirmation signals from all infiltration teams. The prison facilities are ready for simultaneous liberation." Marcus turned to study the tactical display that dominated the observation deck. 47 Cathurian prison facilities across 23 star systems, each holding thousands of prisoners from dozens of species. The operation would attempt to liberate all of them simultaneously, using the communication techniques Marcus had developed to coordinate actions across impossible distances. "And our Cathurian guests?" Marcus asked. "Still unconscious in the medical bay," Rodriguez replied with a smile that held no warmth. Dr. Chen estimates another 6 hours before the interrogation drugs wear off. The captured Kithurian officers had been taken during a raid on a supply convoy 3 weeks earlier. Marcus had insisted on studying them directly, observing their behavior patterns and psychological responses under controlled conditions. What he'd learned had made Operation Silent Thunder possible. Admiral Harrison approached from the command stations, his expression mixing pride and concern. Marcus, final confirmation from all theater commands. Everyone is in position and awaiting your signal. Are you ready for this? Marcus looked at the tactical display again, seeing the culmination of months of planning and preparation. Each of those prison facilities represented thousands of lives, beings who'd been broken, silenced, forgotten by their captors. In a few hours, they would either be free or dead, depending on whether his understanding of Kithurian psychology was accurate. "I'm ready," he said quietly. "Signal all units. Operation Silent Thunder is authorized to commence." Rodriguez began transmitting the authorization codes to resistance cells scattered across the galaxy. Within hours, the largest coordinated prison break in galactic history would begin. And it would all be possible because of techniques developed by a man who'd spent 3 years sitting silently in a cell, watching his guards and learning to speak without words. But as Marcus watched the operation begin, his mind was already focused on the larger battle to come. The prison breaks were only the first phase of something much more ambitious, a plan that would either end the Kithurian Empire's expansion forever or provoke them into destroying every human world in retaliation. 3 hours later, reports began flowing in from across the galaxy. The first phase was succeeding beyond their most optimistic projections. "Kepler Station reports complete facility liberation," Commander Rodriguez announced. "Estimated 14,000 prisoners freed, all Kithurian guards neutralized." "Vega Prime confirms successful breakout," came another report. 26,000 liberated, including the entire Zelani diplomatic corps. "Ross 128 facility is secure. Prisoners are being evacuated to prepared safe houses." The reports continued for over an hour as facility after facility fell to coordinated internal uprisings. The prisoners, trained in Marcus's techniques through networks the Kithurians couldn't detect, had turned their own prisons into weapons against their captors. But Marcus knew the real test was yet to come. The prison breaks were designed to provoke a specific response from the Kithurian command structure, one that would expose their greatest weakness. Admiral Harrison studied the incoming data with obvious amazement. 43 successful liberations out of 47 targets. "Marcus, this is extraordinary." "It's just the beginning," Marcus replied. "The Kithurians will respond exactly as we predicted. Their psychology doesn't allow for any other choice." As if summoned by his words, new alerts began flashing across the tactical displays. Kithurian fleet movements, massive and coordinated, heading toward every system where prison breaks had occurred. "There it is," Marcus said with satisfaction. "The final coordination moved up by 6 months because we forced their hand." Colonel Santos, who had been monitoring Kithurian communications intercepts, looked up with grim confirmation. "All Kithurian fleets are moving to retake the liberated facilities. They're committing everything. This is their entire strategic reserve." Marcus nodded. Kithurian psychology can't tolerate the loss of control the prison breaks represent. They have to respond with overwhelming force to re-establish psychological dominance. It's not a choice for them, it's a compulsion. "Which leaves their home systems virtually undefended," Admiral Harrison said, understanding dawning in his expression. "Exactly. The real target was never the prisons. It was getting their fleets to move away from their core world so we could strike at their heart." Marcus activated the tactical display's secondary projection, showing Kithurian space and the fleet movements now converging on resistance-held systems. At the center of their territory, the homeworld of Kithuros Prime sat protected by only a skeleton force, exactly as Marcus had predicted. "Sir," Commander Rodriguez said urgently, "we're receiving transmission from the captured Kithurian officers. They're awake and requesting to speak with you personally." Marcus had been expecting this. The Kithurians he'd been studying had been carefully selected, all of them intelligence specialists with knowledge of their species' strategic planning. As the prison breaks unfolded, they would have realized what was happening and why. Put them through to my personal quarters, Marcus instructed. I'll speak with them privately. The walk to his quarters gave Marcus time to prepare mentally for what would be the most important conversation of his life. Everything depended on the Cathurians reacting exactly as he expected to his final revelation. The three captured officers sat in restraints that prevented physical movement, but allowed them to speak through their translators. Their elongated forms showed signs of stress, rapid breathing, elevated heart rate, the subtle postural changes Marcus had learned to read during his captivity. "I am Interrogator Vexhai," the senior officer said as Marcus entered. "I demand to know why you have awakened us at this time." "Because you need to understand what's happening," Marcus replied, settling into a chair across from them. "And because your understanding is crucial to what comes next." "The prison break operations are militarily insignificant," another officer, designated tactful, interjected. "Minor tactical victories that cannot affect the strategic balance." Marcus smiled. "You're absolutely right, the prison breaks don't matter strategically, they're a distraction." The three Cathurians exchanged the rapid hand gestures that indicated urgent communication. Marcus had learned to read basic Cathurian body language during his months of study, and their confusion was obvious. "A distraction from what objective?" Vexhai asked. "From the real target," Marcus said calmly, "Kithuros Prime." The silence that followed was profound. Marcus watched their expressions shift through disbelief, alarm, and finally understanding as the implications sank in. "Impossible," Tactful said finally. "No enemy force could reach the homeworld. Our defensive networks are currently being redeployed to recapture the prison facilities," Marcus interrupted. "Your entire strategic reserve is moving away from Kithuros Prime right now, leaving it defended by obsolete orbital platforms and training squadrons." "You cannot know our fleet dispositions," the third officer, designated Morthan, said with desperate authority. Marcus stood and activated a holographic display showing current Cathurian fleet movements across the galaxy. The captured officers stared at the information with growing horror. "I know your fleet dispositions because I know your psychology," Marcus said quietly. 3 years of captivity taught me how your minds work. You can't tolerate the loss of control the prison breaks represent. You have to respond with overwhelming force, even when logic would suggest a measured response. "The psychological compulsion to reestablish dominance through massive force projection," he continued, "overrides strategic thinking every time. It's not a flaw in your planning, it's a fundamental aspect of how your consciousness operates." Vexhai's breathing had become rapid and shallow. "Even if this analysis is correct, you lack the force to threaten our homeworld. Human resistance capabilities aren't just human anymore," Marcus interrupted. "The prison breaks freed not just humans, but representatives of every major species in the galaxy. The Thren Empire, the Zelani Collective, the Cathari Republic, all of them have forces hidden in deep space, waiting for exactly this opportunity." Marcus manipulated the display to show massive fleet formations declocking throughout the galaxy, all bearing the mixed insignia of a dozen different species. "You see, the real lesson of my captivity wasn't about human communication techniques," he explained. "It was about what happens when different species learn to truly understand each other. We've built an alliance that transcends old boundaries because we learn to communicate in ways that go beyond words." The captured Cathurians stared at the display in stunned silence. The combined fleet was enormous, larger than anything the Resistance should have been able to assemble. "Impossible," Morthan whispered. "These species have been enemies for millennia. They cannot coordinate at this level." "They couldn't," Marcus agreed, "until they learned techniques developed in a prison cell by a human who had nothing to lose. Communication that transcends language barriers, coordination that doesn't require technological infrastructure, trust that builds through shared understanding rather than formal treaties." He leaned forward, his expression deadly serious. "The Cathurian Empire has spent centuries conquering species one at a time, using their inability to communicate and coordinate against them. But those days are over. Every species you've defeated is now part of something larger, something you can't comprehend or counter." Vexhai found his voice. What do you want from us?" "I want you to send a message to your high command," Marcus said. Tell them that the entity they know as the Reaper is offering them one chance to end this war without the complete destruction of your civilization. Our civilization cannot be destroyed by. Your fleets are scattered across the galaxy chasing prison breaks, Marcus interrupted. Your homeworld is defended by obsolete equipment and raw recruits. In approximately 4 hours, the combined forces of 17 different species will drop out of hyperspace in the Cthulhu system and demand your surrender. The captured officers stared at him in growing horror. But here's what your high command needs to understand, Marcus continued. This isn't about revenge. This isn't about destroying the Cthulhu Empire. This is about ending a war that's consumed too many lives already. He stood, moving to the viewport that showed the Resistance fleet preparing for departure. The species you've conquered don't want to become conquerors themselves. They want their freedom, their independence, and the right to communicate and trade with each other without interference. Give them that, and this alliance will withdraw to defend their own territories. And if our high command refuses? Tactful asked quietly. Marcus turned back to them, his expression grave. Then Cthulhu's prime burns, and your empire dies with it. Not because we want to destroy you, but because your psychology won't allow you to accept any outcome except total dominance or total defeat. The three officers exchanged rapid gestures of communication before Vexhai spoke again. You have studied our behavioral patterns extensively. 3 years of observation, Marcus confirmed. I know how you think, how you make decisions, what drives your strategic planning. That's why I know you'll either accept complete surrender or fight to the last ship. There is no possibility of compromise or negotiated settlement, Morthen said, and Marcus could hear the recognition of truth in the translated voice. None, your consciousness doesn't allow for it, which is why this message is so important. Your high command has approximately 4 hours to decide whether the Cthulhu Empire survives this war. Marcus moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I hope they choose survival. The galaxy is large enough for all of us if we can learn to respect each other's right to exist. The door sealed behind him, leaving the captured officers alone with the weight of their empire's fate. 2 hours later, Marcus stood on the bridge of the Defiant Dawn as the combined fleet prepared to enter hyperspace. Around him, beings from 17 different species worked together with an efficiency that would have been impossible just months earlier. Admiral Harrison approached, his expression mixing excitement and apprehension. All units report ready for jump. The moment we drop out of hyperspace in the Cthulhu system, there's no going back. I know, Marcus replied. Signal all fleet commanders, we jump in 5 minutes. As the final preparations continued around him, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. 3 years of silence had taught him that communication was about more than words, that understanding could transcend the barriers that seemed insurmountable. Now that understanding was about to be tested on the largest possible scale. Incoming transmission from Cthulhu's Prime, the communications officer announced. They're requesting to speak with the entity designated as the Reaper. Marcus felt his heart rate increase. Put them through. The face that appeared on the main screen was unmistakably Cthulhian, but older and bearing the elaborate facial modifications that indicated the highest levels of their hierarchy. This was High Coordinator Zelnith, the supreme leader of the Cthulhu Empire. I am High Coordinator Zelnith, the figure said without preamble. I have received reports of your communications with our captured personnel. Explain your terms. Marcus stepped forward, very aware that his words would determine whether billions lived or died. High Coordinator, my terms are simple. Complete withdrawal of Cthulhian forces from all conquered territories. Recognition of the independence and sovereignty of all species currently under your control. Establishment of neutral zones to prevent future conflicts. In exchange for the continued existence of the Cthulhian Empire within your original territorial boundaries. No retaliation for past conquests. No interference with your internal governance. Zelnith's expression was unreadable through the translation matrix. And if we refuse, then we settle this matter through force, Marcus said quietly. And given the current disposition of your fleets, that outcome would be unfortunate for everyone involved. The High Coordinator was silent for long moments, no doubt consulting with advisors and analyzing the tactical situation. You understand that accepting these terms would fundamentally alter the nature of our civilization, Zelnith finally said. Yes, Marcus replied, but the alternative is the end of your civilization entirely. Sometimes adaptation is the only path to survival. Another long pause. Marcus could see the struggle playing out in the alien leader's posture, the conflict between psychological compulsion and logical necessity. We require time to consider these terms. You have 30 minutes, Marcus said firmly. After that, this fleet enters your home system and the matter is settled by other means. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in tense silence. Around him, Marcus could feel the weight of history pressing down like a physical force. In half an hour, the galaxy would know whether communication and understanding could triumph over conquest and domination. Admiral Harrison approached. Think they'll surrender? I think, Marcus said slowly, they'll make the choice their psychology demands. The question is whether that choice leads to survival or extinction. 28 minutes later, as the fleet prepared to jump, another transmission arrived from Kithuro's Prime. High Coordinator Zelnith appeared on screen again, but this time his posture indicated formal capitulation. The Kithurian Empire accepts your terms, he said with obvious difficulty. Our fleets will withdraw from occupied territories immediately. We surrender. Marcus felt a wave of relief so intense it was almost painful. Around him, the bridge crew erupted in cheers that were quickly echoed throughout the fleet as word spread. High Coordinator, Marcus said when the celebration died down, you've made the right choice. The galaxy is large enough for all of us. Tell me, Zelnith said quietly, the entity known as the Reaper, what will become of this reputation now? Marcus considered the question. The name had served its purpose, had become a symbol powerful enough to end a war. But symbols, like wars, should end when their time had passed. The Reaper was born from silence and isolation, he said finally. Now that silence is broken and isolation ended, perhaps that entity can rest. And the human Marcus Chen. Marcus smiled, feeling lighter than he had in years. Marcus Chen is going home, to help rebuild what was lost and create something better than what came before. The transmission ended, and Marcus turned to find Admiral Harrison watching him with obvious curiosity. So what now, Marcus? You've ended a galactic war through communication techniques developed in a prison cell. What do you do for an encore? Marcus looked around the bridge at beings from a dozen different species working together in perfect harmony. Then out at the starfield where ships that had been enemies for millennia now flew as allies. Now we learn, he said quietly. We learn to build something that's never existed before, a galaxy where different species can communicate, cooperate, and thrive together, where no one needs to conquer or be conquered. Think it's possible? Marcus thought about his 3 years of silence, about the techniques that had grown from necessity into revolution, about the understanding that had bridged gaps between minds that seemed impossible to cross. A week ago, ending this war through negotiation seemed impossible, he said. But communication is a powerful thing. Once you learn to truly hear what others are saying, even when they're not speaking, anything becomes possible. As the fleet turned away from conquest and toward home, Marcus Chen stood quietly on the bridge and listened to the beautiful sound of different voices working together in perfect harmony. The silence was finally broken, and in its place was something far more valuable than any empire, understanding that transcended species, communication that needed no translation, and the promise of a future built on cooperation rather than conquest. The Reaper's work was done. Marcus Chen's work was just beginning.